Hi and welcome everybody again to the next topic. Today we will talk about the ethics and principle of permaculture, since those two aspects especially are what distinguish permaculture from other disciplines and especially from conventional agriculture. So let's jump into the agenda of today's video and today's class. First we'll review real quick again the permaculture flower, which you've seen in the little booklet. And I will pick out a couple of terms and talk about them just as a little review for us to have a quick entry point again into what is permaculture, and we will see all the aspects that permaculture can cover. Then we will already jump into the first points of today, important terms when it comes to principles and ethics of permaculture. Then we will go into what are the ethics, and we'll go through different principles of permaculture, mainly looking at the ones from Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. We will look at different types of principles we will see, and then we will have some questions for discussion, which you can do at home with your friends or with your colleagues. Then we will go into the 12 principles of David Holmgren in specific. And again, you will get some questions for discussion at home with your friends, colleagues, and family. And we'll finalize with next steps and homeworks for you. Yes, this is the permaculture flower that you have also in the little booklet. As you can see, in the middle of everything, basically the core of what is permaculture and what is characteristic for it are permaculture ethics and design principles. And we see that the next circle around that basically are more aspects that clarify a bit what we understand with that. So we have techniques and ethics and principles regarding the built environment, regarding the tools and technology, regarding culture and education, health and spiritual well-being, finance and economics, land, tenure and community, land and nature stewardship. So we see there's many topics that are covered by permaculture. And then when we go into some aspects in particular, so when we look at, for example, community management, one thing that stands out here is conflict resolution. Maybe we might ask our questions, what does that have to do with permaculture? Well, lots of. Since we're always talking about collaboration, or we're talking about taking care of the environment, taking care of people, there's emotions in play. We're talking maybe about empathy, but we might also talk about, okay, let's cooperate. And within people's contacts, it's almost a given that offend might come. And even more when you like people, you might even feel more offended when you may be disappointed or your expectations are not met. That's basically when offense comes. So then we need techniques also that allow us some conflict resolution, since we know that conflicts are not efficient and peaceful things, and they're resource wasting basically. Well, looking at, for example, land and nature stewardship, a concept that we will also see later on and in the design course, which is keyline water harvesting, or just in general harvesting of water. We see also kind of agroforestry, but then let's jump on the complete other side, for example. When we talk about tools and technology, for example, and we also see that we talk about transport. Here we see the bicycle, for example. But then we might also jump into maybe health and spiritual well-being and see that we have preventative health, preventative medicine, holistic medicine. So there's many aspects also we can cover from that side. So we see that permaculture basically incorporates many aspects around the topic of sustainability and brings them together into a design system. When we talk about the ethics of permaculture, we can basically distinguish three main ethics that we talk about, which is take care of earth, take care of people, and fair share. Well, take care of Earth. That's a good starting point. Taking care of something means also, like the word said, caring for it. Like a caretaker, and that caretaker, like I said, should be empathetic towards the person or thing it takes care of. So when we talk about Earth, it's not treating it as dirt only, or as soil. So we really think of it as maybe a living organism or a being that we want to take care of. So taking care means not exploiting. So we don't want to maximize maybe only the outputs. We will look at the needs and want to cover also the needs and not only think about our own needs. However, important in permaculture is also that we take care of people. We've seen in the definitions that it was really important to incorporate the human settlement or the human aspect into the permaculture design and make sure this is part of what we understand of permaculture. And that's one of the biggest challenges actually, that we incorporate the human being into the design system and make a regenerative system, including the human beings. So taking care of people means covering their needs, but also looking at the emotional side. Yeah, so we also look at things like conflict resolution, but also emotional capacities, emotional well-being, which goes in line with many things. Yes, and fair share, that is also quite interesting. We might not only thinking of sharing money, yeah, we might think of sharing resources with colleagues, friends, neighbors. So the sharing aspect obviously is quite important in permaculture, but we might also think of we sharing our excess production. No? For example, you have a tree, yeah, so you can decide to harvest everything for yourself. Or you decide, okay, I'm harvesting maybe 3/4 or 4/5 or whatever you want to give back, and say, okay, certain part of my harvest, I already say, is dedicated for nature. Whether it is for the bees or for the microorganisms or for other animals, for the birds, or just for the earthworms, let us share what we have, and nature will give it back to us in forms of nutrients and maybe more biodiversity, more stability, etc. So by sharing, we also get back. Sharing is caring. So we know that this is very true here. So let's look at some important terms that we're going to talk about today, or that will become a bit clearer also during the course that you should have in mind. So the first term is conservation. Yeah, we talk about nature conservation. Permaculture includes lots of conservation strategies, soil conservation mainly, yeah, but also conservation of species, of biodiversity, of seeds, and so on. So this is very important. Maybe also conservation of human well-being. We talk about ethics, so let's ask the question, what are ethics? So we just saw the three main ethics. So ethics basically for us also say what is good and what is bad. So ethics basically define the line between good and bad, which means we have some kind of criteria, we have values to decide over what we should do and what we shouldn't do. So to apply it now to permaculture, the ethics tell us whether we are taking care of people or not. And if we see we are not taking care of people, we're basically crossing the line there. That's what we use the ethics for. Yeah, intensive. Yeah, we use that term in the way that we talk maybe about intensive agriculture, intensive gardening, intensive maintenance, intensive setup costs. So we need to use that term of intensive. We need to understand. And the opposite, extensive. No? We talk about principles that are like also values and core to-dos basically that we should follow. Then we talk about restoration. Yeah, we're talking about restoring ecosystems, restoring soil productivity, soil life, for example. And we talk about resources. We analyze our resources. We want to use natural resources. We want to use resources in the wisest way, and so on. So the term resource is quite important to understand. So let's look at the permaculture principles. So here we see the 12 principles of David Holmgren, which later on we will go through each of them. So this is the first thing we look at. Then next thing we look at some of Bill Mollison before we go through each one of them. So the first one that we always start with basically is observe and interact. Also when we then design later on, the observation part is quite important in permaculture. So basically before we do anything, before we implement anything, we should observe. And you say in permaculture, you should at least observe 1 year minimum to have, for example, all seasons covered. Ideally you have data, obviously, that goes further than 1 year. Another principle, catch and store energy, then obtain a yield, self-regulate. I will just go through them real quick because we're going to go through them more in depth further on. Use and value renewables, produce no waste. Now talking about circular economy, circularity, for example. No? Design from pattern to detail, integrate, use small, slow solutions, use and value diversity, use edges and value the marginal, and lately creatively use and respond to change. Something we all need for our lives for sure. So there's other principles, so we will look at those first. The one, Bill Mollison's ethics and principles. The first one, again here, is to observe. So observation is always the main thing we should do first before acting. We need to gather data, we need to understand patterns, we need to understand the flow of energy, of nutrients, materials, and so on. So this is always the first thing. Also, like a guideline, first you should observe. Another principle is to work with rather than against nature. So, which means if we see that something that is continuously occurring and we want to fight it, let's say weeds that come up in our garden, and we need to understand first why are they coming up, and then maybe go with them instead of against them, which means in not taking them out, for example, but let systems evolve so that from the primary stage of a system, it can go to a more complex system because weeds come up because the soil is poor, or you have like a degraded system, and weeds are mostly pioneer plants that want to cover bare soil, basically. Nature doesn't want to have any bare soil. So for us then, we could always try to pick up the weeds, or just say, I go with the flow. No, another example, that if we have a deciduous tree that always has leaves falling in autumn, and you're annoyed because you always have to rake the leaves, and you think, all this work from this tree, but it could be working for your benefit if you use that tree close to a garden, and then that mulch from the tree can fertilize your soil over the winter. You put it in a place where it's within the winds, so the winds maybe carry the mulch over your design. So this would be then working with rather than against nature, which goes in the next line. Maybe you found that leaves to be a problem. And all of a sudden that excess amount of leaves, which were really getting on your nerves, becomes a solution because you need nutrients and restore soil and have soil life. So mulching the ground helps you to do that and to get that. So that problem of excess leaves now becomes the solution for you having maybe a need for nutrients and so on. Well, minimal change for maximum effect sounds good. So we always try to find techniques that are small, and we also want to appreciate what we have, use what we have, and what we change should have a maximum effect. So only change things with big impacts, you could say that. Theoretically, also the yield of the system is unlimited, like looking at an ecosystem in a climax state, for example, a coral reef, or let's say a big primary forest, for example. Theoretically, you can think of unlimited amount of products you can get from that ecosystem. Talking about ecosystems, and that's why we had also the introduction into ecology, for understanding the role of ecosystems and how we are applying that now into our designs. We say that everything affects everything. So when we plant a tree somewhere within our system, that tree will affect everything around it and somehow affect everything also further away. So we need to take that into account. Or if we store water in one place, we take it out maybe in another place. So even if it's good for us to stop erosion and catch water, maybe that water in another place, which we're not aware of yet, had a certain effect. So for us, redirecting or storing the water, for us, maybe we're taking it out of the system where it was having a certain effect, maybe moisturizing the soil, so you prevent the risk of wildfires, for example. Yeah, so whatever we do, should be cautious about doing so. Or when we, instead of using like pesticides and herbicides, because we know those can then kill lots of things in our soil, which then on the long term can have negative effects on our soil productivity. And then we see how everything affects everything. Well, the law of 80-20, which means that with, for example, 20% of your plants and productive units, you should cover 80% of your needs. That's more or less what this rule should tell us, which basically means we should be as efficient as possible and see how you can quickly cover your needs with a couple of things. Start small. That's also an important advice. Don't try to do everything from the beginning all together. You might be getting frustrated and end up dying trying, so to say. And there's a saying, slow and steady wins the race. We will talk about that later on. So this is quite important. Yeah, and finally, information is not knowledge. Or whenever you don't use something, a resource becomes to waste. So as long as you use the information, it can become knowledge. But if you just have the information for having it, it's not necessarily knowledge. If it's not used to become wiser and to be better. And yeah, Bill Mollison also gives us principles how we actually should design. So we will see that also next session when we talk about natural systems designs. We will see lots of examples of important tools, which in the design course we will learn all of them. And yeah, in this introduction part, we will get an overview about some of the most important ones. Well, very typical for permaculture is zoning, which means distributing your land according to zones. And these zones are defined by their usage or the frequency of use, etc. So we will go into that next session, and we'll see that these zonings already helps us a lot in structuring my design. And each zone maybe then is accompanied with a certain use of plants or animals and so on. So we already get a much better idea of what we want to do with each part of our design. And the idea is inspired by nature. Imagine a stone you throw in a lake. The impact zone is where the biggest energy is basically, and the further you go out, energy becomes less. So the idea is then to put all energy intensive activities close to the center of your design, whether it's the house, your company, or your organization. So you would put all the intensive care units basically close to where you are most of the time to save lots of energy. To understand then different zones and sectors, you need to have sector planning. So you might have a cold sector, a windy sector, a sunny sector, a sector where your neighbors are watching. You might have a sector where maybe there's a non-organic farm that has a GMO coming over to your place. So you want to block it out. So you would like to know energies and sectors that are represented in your design to design accordingly wisely. We should always use multiple elements. Nature means diversity, means multifunctionality. So this is another principle we see here. We see also the importance of relative location. We saw that also in the introduction to ecology, how relative location and interaction matters. Obviously, in an ecosystem, we have no waste, and that's only possible if we use fully biological resources, which can be completely returned to the biological cycle. So talking about cycling, this is the next thing. We want to cycle energy. We don't want to have energy going through our system, in the way of cradle to the grave, and it goes fast through our system, but we want to cycle it and make it stay in our system as long as possible. Ideally, let it not leave our system. We want to increase diversity. Diversity also means stability. Ecosystems are characterized by a high degree of diversity, and the most complex systems are the ones with the highest diversity. Next thing is knowing that we need to accelerate natural succession, because the idea of succession in nature now is bringing ecosystems from a primary stage to a complex stage. And the weeds are a good example. No, bare soil is the beginning, then come the weeds. After a while, maybe some bushes, and maybe some small trees. Further on, over the years, there's now a more friendly environment for bigger species to thrive, and others may be dying off. So over the time, nature is evolving towards a more complex system, and that dynamic is something we cannot stop. So we can try to fight it, but then it's more like Don Quixote who is fighting the windmills, or we can try to go with it, and then it's like the wind in our sails, because we know by increasing complexity, also the amount of products and the amount of stability is increasing. So for us, it's a benefit to work with more mature systems. We want to maximize edges, because we learned about ecotones and the importance of them. And this means stability. We saw the amount of species around these ecotones. So we want to increase diversity. And how can you do that? For example, increasing edges. Last but not least, we are imitating natural patterns, like you can already see. I'm always making references to ecosystems and how we applying those principles to our teaching and our designs. So this is also the idea here. Well, so now let's talk about what is a permaculture design now made of or characterized by. We can see it's rather intensive, or extensive rather than intensive. We can see it has lots of diversity in species, cultivars, yields, microclimates, habitats, and functions. We see integration of agriculture, animal husbandry, forestry, foraging, and landform engineering. We have it adjustable to marginal lands. We make use of naturally inherent characteristics of animals and plants and their relationships to the natural characteristics of landscape for maximum utilization to create an environmentally safe and self-sustaining agriculture, or culture/living systems. We use wild and domestic species to also increase diversity, and we always have a long-term view of sustainability. So for you, as a food for thought, basically, you can ask yourself a question, and during the crisis of COVID-19, I think this question came up pretty often into people's minds when the food market shelves were completely empty. Could we raise all our food in our cities? And is that desirable? Talking about ethics, whether it's good or bad. And that goes in line with our next question to think about. No? Should sheep and goats or chickens be raised in cities? Last question here. What happens to marginal land? Can we use it? What could it be used for? Thinking about zoning. Okay. This is just an idea for us how to go a bit further with permaculture. So here again, we see the 12 principles given by David Holmgren. Let's jump into the first one, observe and interact, like I mentioned. The observation part is always one of the biggest things in our design. Even if it's implemented, then we need to observe whether it's working the right way, and then maybe make some adjustments. Yeah, we here see the picture of an earthworm, which many people may be grossed out by. Yet we have always this little idiom here to explain the principle. It says, no, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So we can see that earthworms function in many positive ways. And yeah, we want to obviously promote their functions. So the idea is always that we observe, we see the patterns that are in place, and we also interact if there's a problem. Not like I mentioned, the problem then becomes the solution. So we are interacting with the system. We are part of it. Not like we said, everything is affecting everything. Well, yeah, a very important topic also, no? Catch and store energy. Yeah, with the idiom, no? Make hay while the sun shines. I think there's many children's stories also talking about that, no? That there's an animal that doesn't want to pick up the hay during summer and then has to suffer in the winter, and so on. So for us, it's really important to make use of what we have and catch and store as much as we can of energy, whether it's sunlight in form of maybe energy and electricity, or in form of biomass that can then be turned into maybe wood and then into firewood. So that could also go into line with catching water and these kind of things. So no, so all the energies that come into our system can be stored maybe in a certain way. Some better than others, but there's many ways in how we can store energy. So you would be surprised what we can consider in energy. No? This also goes in line with this, obtain a yield. You can't work on an empty stomach. So also thinking about starting small, maybe that's your vegetable garden. So before anything, you think, okay, it's nice to have this super sophisticated permaculture design, but first I have to maybe have some kind of profitable business or have productive garden so that I can have food before I can go even further. Because also then thinking about long-term implementation of your design, where the resource is coming from. So you have to start thinking of obtaining yields, yeah, which is making the system in a way profitable or at least successful. No? Important also the principle of self-regulation and accepting feedback. Yeah, in ecosystems, nobody's really intervening, and nature regulates itself and has positive feedback loops, so that even with seasons and the creation and the destruction are going hand in hand, no? And this is what nature basically beautifully shows us all the time, how death and life are so close to each other and how all of that affects us every day. And yeah, nature is smart and can solve problems in many ways that we are not capable of even imagining. So we see that our knowledge is limited, and we should always be as humble to say, okay, let God play his role and see that things are also supposed to go their way, how they're supposed to go. Important also to say use and value renewable resources and services. Yeah, I mean, we know that permaculture started during this peak oil crisis, where most of the discussion was about like how can we get rid of fossil fuels. Still very important. We're thinking now of the Green Deal, maybe of the EU. One of the topics of this is also the end of a fossil fuel era and shifting everything towards renewable energy and renewable resources. So us also as a principle that should guide our actions, whether we have to build a house, make a rooftop, make a fence around the garden, whatever we do. If we then make maybe a priority list, the best and most sustainable resources should come first, which are bio and renewable and sustainable, and everything which is maybe based plastic or other materials which are not renewable, like metals and ores and things like that, that should be less preferred. Important to have in mind. No? We have the principle of produce, not waste. A stitch in times save nines, which also tells us that we should value repairing things. maintaining things in a good way. The better we maintain a house, the less needs repairing, same as a car, same as a computer, same as a fridge, same as a washing machine, same as a tree, same as an animal, so on. So the better we have our maintenance going, the more preventative we are, same as our health, the more we take care of everything in the maintenance modus, everything works out better. We design from patterns to detail. Here we see the spider web. Before I mentioned the stone throwing on the lake and the impact zones and the rings forming. That's what we're also doing. Now we see we have patterns and we recognize those and we copy those. For example, windbreaks of a forest naturally grown. And that's the principle of the pattern we realize in nature and then apply it to our own designs. Integrate rather than segregate, or many hands make light work, like how we see it here in the picture. No? You can imagine that with that amount of people, it's much faster than with half of it or even a fifth of it. Makes it pretty easy to understand. Same for us in permaculture, no? And when we think about many things that we want to implement, they might require manual labor. So it's good to think of how can we integrate our community, our friends, and share our responsibilities, but also not only thinking about humans, but also integrating animals, because we always say, you know, everything gardens, whether it's from earthworms to birds to dogs and cats, cows and goats, everything we can think of in a way gardens. No, they have an impact on the ecosystem. Some are more, each animal can be implemented in design in a different way. And even if we don't have our own domestic animals, it's inevitable basically that animals will come. So even if you plant a forest and you don't have your own animals, be sure over time there's animals coming into the forest, ideally, no? And an ecosystem has flora and fauna, and only both of it can work well together. So we thinking of integrating things. Let's say even if it's maybe you have a fruit orchid, so you might want to introduce some chickens to have some pest control, have some natural fertilizing, natural scratching, working of the soil, and so on. So that's already a much more integrated approach than having both separately. Yes. Slow and steady wins the race, no? Use small and slow solutions, so let's not try to rush into things. Nature has also long cycles, so that also allows us to to understand much better what are the things that are working and what are the things that are not working so well. So the more time we use, the better, to understand how everything works, no? And the bigger they are, the higher the fall. So let's not try to take things too fast and too quick. Yeah. Use and value diversity. I think I mentioned that today many times, the importance of diversity, also from a financial point of view or from a species point of view or from whatever it is, no? Thinking at the idiom here, don't put all your eggs in one basket, makes it pretty clear, no? Don't rely maybe just on one income stream or just one activity or one crop. So that makes us more susceptible, no, more risky to higher to external factors, no. Well, we mentioned the importance of edges in the session about ecotones and the value of the marginal, of margins, edges. And here the picture, no, you see lots of edges, although here you see that it's a pretty deforested and degraded landscape. We see also typical some farming there and no trees. So that has caused lots of problems around the world, no? But we see how nature has many, many edges, many, many forms and curves. And this picture makes it pretty clear. And then when I look at this picture, I see hydrological design and I see reforestation and I see lots of soil restoration possibilities, no? And last but not least, creatively use and respond to change. Quite interestingly, no, during the COVID crisis lockdowns, many people chose to look into permaculture because they realized that now we have to change. We have to think about the food supply chain. We have to think about providing our own medicine maybe, and not depending only on pharmaceuticals giving us some vaccines, because we don't even know how effective it is and who can get it in the end. So now it's time to respond to that creatively. That's very important for us to stay flexible and creative, and that makes also us more resilient to changes. So when we're open-minded and we can change strategies and be open to doing new things and to changing the things, how we did them, makes us more likely to survive. No? So this is important. So whatever happens on your design, on your farm or in your business, so if there's changes, analyze it, observe it, and see also how can you make maybe the problem the solution. So let's try to be creative in this and respond to change in a more constructive way. So again here for you then, and we're going towards the termination of this lecture, I would like you to discuss elements of your environmentally friendly lifestyle if you have one, or how it would look like if you had one, or what would be your ideal sustainable lifestyle. No? What kind of can you identify in your own life, and if not, what would you like to see maybe? No? This is something you can discuss. And now going to the homeworks, more concretely that you have to hand in. So, well, yeah, the idea is now that you take the graph from the very first homework. Remember the farm with all the little details already in there, and then you go through the principles, pick 3 that you like the most or that you see them reflected, and describe a little bit how you see those principles reflected. Then again, something for home. List how your home environment meets or fails to meet the ethics and principles of permaculture. Put a little discussion there and then write a little text. How will your life change when you practice permaculture ethics and principles? And something that you just have to do and not to hand in, basically, start an observation diary. If you want to, you can show it to us or write down how you're doing it. That's also fine. Okay, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed the class and see you in the live sessions.